Hi. Sick kid again. It's the other one this time, little guy. And this time we have a nice little variety of, we got pink eye, and an ear infection, and a cold. It's gonna be a long, long, long day. Anyway, I just wanted to record a couple things for you. I had you take some notes on modernism. I'm going to talk you through a couple of those slides. I also wanted to just kind of run through what's going to be going on for the test over the next 2 days. So tomorrow in class, you'll be taking just the regular Eyes Are Watching God test, the Scantron, the multiple choice, knowing the characters, all that stuff. Um, I'd recommend looking over your study guide for that. And reminder, I'll give you some points for doing it. It's not an assignment. If you don't do it, you won't lose any points. But if you do, we'll give you some points for doing it. I'd also feel free to kind of review through SparkNotes, skim through the text. Please study, please, please, please. And then tomorrow in class, after that Scantron part of the test, which I don't think will take that long, it's about 30 questions or so, we can do a little more work on the essay portion, which will be on Friday. So we'll do the part about the mules and the symbols and above the surface, below the surface, all that stuff on Friday. So if you got questions, you could swing in before school tomorrow. I will be back tomorrow, or after school on Thursday, or before school Friday, to make sure we get all that stuff cleaned up. Couple other things you're gonna do today. You already took a quiz on the Zora, looking for Zora, and I'll kind of talk you through that a little bit when I get back tomorrow. It's pretty straightforward, but I just think there's some interesting things in there. And then I also want to talk a little bit about a couple of the slides from the modernism stuff. You know what? Actually, I'll talk through a couple things with the reading right now, and then I'll talk modernism a little bit, and then I'll leave you alone. So if you open up to page 98, Zora Hurston's politics were a big issue for her because, growing up in Eatonville, as it talks about in here, she was strongly against desegregating schools because she felt like it was an insult to the black school teachers in the area that she grew up, who she felt like did a really good job. Bottom page 98, when she's talking with Miss Mosley, Zora and I went to the same school. It's called Hungerford High now, but it was only to the 8th grade. But our teachers were so good that by the time you left, you knew college subjects. When I went to Morris Brown in Atlanta at that college, the teachers there were teaching me the same things I'd already learned right in Eatonville. I wrote Mama and told her I was going to come home and help with the babies. I wasn't learning anything new. Tell me, Miss Mosley, I asked, why do you suppose Zora was against integration? I read somewhere that she was against school desegregation because she felt it was an insult to black teachers. Oh, one of them, white people, came around asking me about integration one day when I was doing my shopping. I heard him over there talking about it in the store about the schools, and I got out of the way because I knew if they asked me, they wouldn't like what I was going to tell them. But they came up and asked anyhow. What do you think about this integration? One of them said. I acted like I'd heard them wrong. You're asking me what I think about integration, I said. Well, as you can see, I'm just an old colored woman. I was 75 or 76 then. This is the first anyone ever asked me about integration, and nobody asked my grandmother what she thought either, but her daddy was one of you all. Miss Mosley seemed satisfied with the same rejoinder. Do you think living in Eatonville made integration less appealing to you? Well, I can tell you this. I've lived in Eatonville all my life, and I've been in governing of this town. I've been everything but mayor. I've been assistant mayor. Eatonville was and is an all-black town. We have our own police department, post office, town hall, our own school, and good teachers. Do we need integration? Which I think is an interesting way to look at it. And this helps explain kind of why there's a little bit less racism in Eyes Are Watching God, and kind of address some of the problems that some of the other critics had about it at the time, that it wasn't dealing enough with racism. But growing up in this community, in this environment, was different than what a lot of people dealt with in much more racist parts across the country. A couple other things I like about this article. I think it's really fascinating that Alice Walker, and I talked about this in class a little bit, but she read Their Eyes Watching God the first time in college. I think it was Their Eyes Watching God, but maybe it was one of her earlier works. But all of Hurston's books were out of print by this point, so she made it her mission to get all of Hurston's books taught again and out and published, specifically Eyes Are Watching God, which she said is the most important book she's ever read to her. And she did. And, it's taught all over the place, and it's, Oprah made a movie about it and all those things. So she succeeded. She really succeeded. And I really like the story where she goes out in the cemetery and starts to call the Zora, which is creepy and awesome at the same time. Going on, there was just one or two other things that I want to touch on with this. If you go forward to page 111, when she's talking to Dr. Benton, who kind of filled her in on some of the details of how Kirsten died, she died and she had a stroke, and that kind of left her alone. But we've talked a lot about the language in Eyes Are Watching God and the way the characters speak, and some people had a problem with it. They felt like it wasn't sophisticated enough. It shouldn't be in the book. And the Doctor kind of here goes out of his way a little bit to let both Alice Walker know, and then Alice Walker let the reader know that that wasn't how she really talked. She was always stuttering. Her mind, before the stroke, just worked all the time. She was always going somewhere, too. She once went to Honduras to study about something, and then when she died, she was working on a book about Harry the Great. She was so intelligent and really had perfect expressions. Her English was beautiful. Kirsten was interested in folklore, specifically African American folklore, and she would travel to Florida and talk to people and hear folk tales and stories, and she would catalog these and then keep track of them, because a lot of these stories were not being written down at the time, and she thought they were very important and wanted to keep them. And so it was one of her real great talents that, as highly educated as she was, she could still go and talk to people that didn't have the education she did, and it didn't make it seem like she was trying to be smarter than they were, which is hard to do. And she did a really good job with it, and it allowed her to gather a lot of information that she, as I said, cataloged and put into books. And some of that folklore stuff is in Eyes Are Watching God, like the scene where the buzzards are talking at the funeral and things like that. So we'll touch on this again when I get back, but that was kind of the main thing I wanted to get at. If we go to the Modernism PowerPoint, there were a couple slides that I had you look at, take notes on. First slide, the second one, what is modernism? We're going to be talking about modernism for the next couple weeks, especially as we get into some of the modern poetry and Great Gatsby and things like that. But modernism took place around the 1920s, maybe a little bit earlier, and as it says in the notes, it reflects the faith in traditional American beliefs and values, including the American dream. So what happened is there were a whole bunch of pretty big societal things happening at this time. World War I was taking place, and a lot of soldiers. I'm going to show you a poem when I get back, written by a British soldier, and the poem is about. It's called Dulce Decorum Est, and it was sweet and just to die for one's country. This guy's poem was about trench warfare and watching one of his, a guy he knows, die in a mustard gas attack. And so there were a lot of soldiers who returned from the war, and the things that they experienced in the war didn't, when they got back to the United States, a lot of things they were taught in terms of about traditional American values didn't seem to make sense in light of what they'd experienced in the war. And so it really caused them to kind of question a lot of things that they'd been traditionally taught as they were growing up. And we'll look at a couple more of those, some more of those things as we get into the unit a little bit. Going on to slide 3, talks about the American dream. There was the big stock market crash right around this time, and so the traditional rules that you play by, that you've been taught, if you work hard and you save your money and you invest wisely, you can do well, and you can make yourself a success no matter what background you come from, no matter how wealthy your parents were. You can achieve money, you can achieve happiness, you can get a house, and you can do all those things. And around this time, and those things are certainly possible, but they may not be quite as straightforward as some people are led to believe. And so, especially once we get into The Great Gatsby, that's what that's one of the big themes in The Great Gatsby, that there's this character who does everything possible to achieve this, and it just doesn't end up working out in the end. Going on to slide 4, Harsh Awakening. So these were some of the things that were going on, as I kind of just mentioned, World War I, massive destruction, and just a brutal war, trench warfare, and gas attacks, and one of our professors who leads the program that I teach at the college and the schools lectured on this a little bit, and she said, there would just be a line of people, and you would need to climb up over the trench, and people would just get mown down, person after person. You'd just stand there and watch it happen, and then it would be your turn. So these events, and also some cultural things going on, painting in different styles. If you think of Picasso, and I'll show you a picture of a Picasso painting, but if you've ever seen one, you probably have. It's one like a portrait, except eyes here, noses here, mouths here, and it just, everything looks different. Just experimentation with art and artistic forms and different ways to write and paint. In addition to big cultural things like Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud had the idea, and I'll get into this a little bit more when I get back, but of, people traditionally thought of your mind and the way you think about things as whole. You know what you're thinking because you're actively thinking it. But he came up with an idea that there are parts of your brain and mind that you aren't really aware of that they're working. The subconscious part of your brain and the conscious part of your brain. Conscious part is where you're actively thinking, I'm hungry, I want to go eat, I want to do these things. Subconscious part of your brain would be, say that you're upset about something and you just decide, I'm not going to think about this anymore. I'm done. It's over. I'm not going to think about it, and it's gone. And you just kind of bury it deep. Those things don't go away. And so Freud had this idea that there was a whole part of your brain that you didn't even know about that was working and influencing your behavior and influencing the things you think and the things you do. And that really weirded people out. In addition to Einstein's theory of relativity, just a whole bunch of things happening which changed the way people looked at the world, all in one kind of a big fell swoop. And these events led to, as it says, a strong disillusionment. So disillusionment means the illusions that you held, the one previously held, are taken away. Okay, so when Freud developed this new idea, then the idea that, I know the way my brain works and I'm in control of everything, maybe that went away. Okay, and so people become disillusioned with society. And we'll be looking at there's lots of examples that we're going to be reading in that of people kind of feeling that way as these different changes have taken place. Going on to slide 7, I had you skip a couple of those, and I'll look at those. Those are some more cultural changes. Characteristics of modern literature. As I was kind of getting into experiments with form and technique in poetry and prose, we're going to read some poetry that gets pretty weird. And it gets rid of a lot of the traditional rules, like if you think of sonnets and things that have very strict rhyme scheme and meter. Everything is really laid out, specific number of syllables per line. We're going to move way away from that into people just trying. Some of the poems we're going to read are long and complicated. Some are 3-4 lines long, really, really short and simple. People just saying, you know what, I don't need to write the way everyone else has written up to this point, and I'm going to break the rules and change them. One of the literary techniques that we'll look at a little bit is called stream of consciousness. And we're not going to read a lot of that because it's kind of complicated and frankly it's a little bit annoying, but it's trying to write the way your mind works. So if you think about the way you think about things, one thought goes into another, goes into another, goes into another. There aren't really pauses in your thinking. And if you think about that little kind of monologue that's going through your head all the time, trying to write that way. Another characteristic of this is a new kind of hero that's flawed, and disillusioned yet honorable and courageous. We're going to read some Ernest Hemingway, and this is really his big idea, that the best thing that someone can do in the face of a world which doesn't really make sense is to be stoic and to have grace under pressure, not get emotionally invested in what's going on, and to just kind of try to be clear and calm and see through the problem, questioning, and also questioning of traditional beliefs and social structures. And we'll kind of get into that with the American Dream stuff, specifically with Great Gatsby. And there was just one other slide that I wanted to look at. Talk stream of consciousness, about heroes, and lastly, what still remains. American modernists challenged the American dream, but retained some of its ideals, the ideal of self-reliance. So even if you were to kind of trace this value all the way back to Puritan times, this is one that has shown up in time period after time period after time period, the importance of relying on yourself and everyone kind of take care of themselves. Writers such as Hemingway still envision American landscape as a kind of Eden. I think that's about all I wanted to get into. So anyway, big picture of this. Modernism is a time period when the artistic movements that were going on kind of really mirrored the changes that people had about the way they thought about society and the way they started to kind of question things that they'd been taught and question things that they believed in previously. So that was a long, boring lecture for me, but at least like I've got green on my face, so there's that. So the rest of the period, you're going to watch the end of Their Eyes Are Watching God. I'm going to show about the last 20-25 minutes, so if you've seen a little bit of that, just kind of go with it. It won't be too much. And then I will be back tomorrow. Thanks.